story about the Newfoundland Railway. Or more to the point, it's about railroaders, the men who are still passionate and nostalgic and emotional about this piece of Newfoundland history. The trains had been gone nearly 20 years, but these men refused to let go. Producer Fred Greening has our story. It's called Boys and Their Toys.
Always wanted to be an engineer. That's all I ever wanted to be. But Dad wasn't having any part of that.
He's 86 now, still operating in the shadow of his father, who retired as a railroad engineer 50 years ago. Frank Rogers took his dad's advice and became a successful businessman in St. John's. He satisfied his own childhood dream and became a part-time engineer in his basement.
There's roughly about $18,000 worth of stuff sitting there on the table.
I heard you say earlier, once a man, twice a child.
That's true. No question about it.
You would ride the train with your dad too, I take it.
Ride the engine, yes. Oh, and then there was one trip, yes. It just wasn't once or twice. We were at it all the time. Whenever we got the opportunity to go on the train, I always had to ride on the engine. Particularly if Dad was on.
In the late 1800s, the Newfoundland government decided to punch a railway into the Newfoundland interior and on to the other side of the island. St. John's was doing fairly well, but the politicians of the day had big dreams. They wanted to create jobs in Newfoundland other than the fishery. They were convinced a railway would bring prosperity to a society that lived on the edge of the world for too long. Down in the left-hand corner of this picture are the humble beginnings of the Newfoundland Railway leading from the docks in St. John's Harbor. This is its final destination on the other side of the island in Port aux Basques, taken around 1898, the same year the railway made its first crossing.
I made a scene.
The government never intended the railway to be a first-class railway, and it wasn't. Turns were too steep, grades were too high. Engineers would sometimes have to take half a train up the grade and go back for the rest. During the winter, a train could spend days stuck in the snow or be blown off the tracks by the wind. A slow-moving albatross that lumbered across Newfoundland for 90 years. It became the butt of jokes. It was known as the New People. This bridge carried trains across the Exploits River starting in 1901. At 300 meters, it's the longest trestle in Newfoundland. It's at Bishop's Falls, an old railway town, home of former railroad engineer Tom Penny.
I always loved the railroad, and I grew up by the tracks here.
In front of his home stands a contraption that signaled trains when to stop at a station and when to go.
They would use a chain. They had a chain coming in from this board mechanism and into their office. And the dispatcher would tell the operator to leave his board in stop position for a certain number of probably minutes, or it could be a half hour or so. And then, when he was finished with the stop board position, he would tell the operator to put the board clear. So then the operator would take his chain inside his office and bring the board down in proceed position. So that's how it works.
Tom Penny drove his train through some heavy snow drifts during his 37 years with the railway. The most notorious hazard for snow was a place called the Gap Topsail, a high exposed point of land in the center of the island. The early railroad pioneers took this route because it was shorter and cheaper to build. But it turned out to be a colossal mistake, and because of the winter storms, they paid the price many times over. In this interview done in 1962, the roadmaster says it wasn't unusual to take up to 80 hours to clear the track.
And from milepost 324 to milepost 339, this tremendous lot of snow is drifted to the tops of the telegraph poles in sea. The wind up to 40 and 50 and as high as 80 miles an hour.
And when the railway shut down for good, railroaders like Tom Penny scrounged bits and pieces of souvenirs. Most of Tom's stuff is on his front lawn, including a keepsake from the Gap Topsail.
I got a friend of mine when they were dismantling the railway to get me a couple of mileboard signs. So I said I would like to have the mileboard sign for the Gap Topsail. Gap Topsail was 333 miles from St. John. I've had several, probably, a dozen people anyway, I guess, over the years have stopped here and come in. Some of them come in and ask me, can they take some pictures of this? And a lot of them are railroaders from the mainland. I've had people from the mainland stop here and ask them, this stuff I got here in the garden.
The railway was a costly venture. So few Newfoundlanders, just not enough passengers to make it pay. And the cost of moving a ton of freight up those steep grades was huge, especially. The beginning of the end came in the early 60s. A freshly paved highway across Newfoundland meant more people and freight traveled by car. It was faster and more convenient. On historic day, July 2nd, 1969, the passenger train left Port-au-Basque and crossed the island for the last time.
Your attention, please. Train number 102, the Caribou, now boarding for points to St. John's.
And with no more fanfare than that, 71 years of passenger train service came to an end. As the Newfoundland Express made its way into the history books, it set off a debate that continues to this very day. Should the railway have been allowed to die? It's an emotional issue about a cultural institution that creates a lot of passion among Newfoundlanders. We'll meet more of them when we come back. The old rail bed has become a haven for ATVs in the summer and snowmobiles in the winter. And most Newfoundlanders who remember the railway still feel cheated that the trains are not coming down these dusty trails. And one of those railway stalwarts is Mont Lingard. He's a former railroader and has a cottage at Millertown Junction in the middle of the island. These guys are from New Brunswick, part of a tour group that crosses the island every summer on the old rail line. One of their stops is Mont Lingard.
Twinkle toes coming up. He's a first timer.
I don't know if I'm making it up.
No, put your boots on. No, snuggle up to your knee. Snow there.
How many times did you say in the run of a winter they get stuck in the guy because of the snow and the drifting snow?
Some winters not at all. Some winters continually all winter.
This is where Mont Lingard is in his element. He wrote 5 books about the Newfoundland Railway, and they're filled with pictures, many of which line the walls in his cottage. Here's one of the first steam locomotives just outside Corner Brook, taken around 1898, just after the passenger service began. Here's one taken the day the service ended, in 1969. Here's one of those famous snowdrifts along the Gap Topsail. The passenger train service in Newfoundland is indeed a rich and colorful story.
Was we gonna play some?
Visitors not only get to see Mont's collection of pictures, they get to listen to his music. This one by Newfoundlander Clean Best.
You can hear the topsails better up or off to the west, while speeding down the Howley on the Newfoundland Express. We're passing out of Deer Lake or Port of Broadway bound. You can hear the mighty number, no letters can be found. You can hear the lakes and valleys and where the salmon rest. You can hear the moon while riding on the Newfoundland Express.
When I built the cabin first, it faced, instead of on the water, it faced the track. And I think that was just because of me. I just wanted to watch the trains more than I wanted to watch the water.
The passenger service across Newfoundland ended in 1969, but the trains weren't done just yet. The freight train still ran. Well, it was meant to carry only freight. But one town along the old rail line wasn't connected by road, so CN decided to add a couple of passenger cars to their freight train on a section of track that took in the town of Howley.
Okay, hold 945, hold.
But this was no ordinary train. It even stopped to let people off at their cabins with their favorite fishing hole. The federal government was heavily subsidizing what was left of the Newfoundland Railway, and by 1988, it had had enough. Ottawa put an extra $800 million into provincial highways and shut down the railway. The end of September 1988, it was finally over. The conductor picked up his tickets for the last time, and the capacity crowd gave her a typical Newfoundland send-off. When she passed Mont Lingard's cottage at Millertown Junction, there on the deck were his family and friends. Mont was on the train.
Engineer Petterall, he said, well, Mom, would you like to take her? I said, yeah. So going down to Gap, he said, I'll give her an application. An application means you apply the brakes and just slow her down a little bit. I probably took her for 15 miles down to Gidgeville, blow the whistle.
We're like a kid again.
Just like a kid again, yeah.
The railway lost no time in making sure its train service was finished. They immediately started taking up the tracks. And just when you thought the railway was dead, there was a resurrection.
I've been in this spot now for 46 years. I come better every day, and as the wrong better are worse on the track a bit. Yeah. When I get up in the morning to walk through, I look at this, a lot of memories going. A lot of memories.
Ron Kelly lives in Howley. He spent 35 years with the railway, working with speeders that carried men and their gear to maintain the tracks and fix the rail bed.
I got this speeder, and I had him over on my lawn for 12 or 13 years. Now, my intention was when I bought it, that's what I was going to do. But I couldn't seem to get no rail nowhere. How the hell was I going to do it?
told him the speeder a dozen years earlier had planned to build his own railway. He had the rails, but he never had enough space.
He couldn't use them because his land was too small. Eh? You had to have a certain, there's only so much you can go at a time, they curve it. So, he told me to make an offer, so I made an offer, and that's how I come to get this, eh? But then it was night and day then. Waking up in the morning, 5 o'clock, waiting for daylight to come to get at it, eh?
I suppose you can't do it all right away. You gotta have something that...
Oh, yes, if you've done this all, you wouldn't, there's nothing to wake up for in the morning, eh? There's always a little project, eh? And not only that, it gets clear of the bush. They got more projects open up there. I get clear of that, eh? Yeah. And, just in the morning, you open that door and look at that, something blows through you, I don't know what it is. Yeah. Dreams about it. I've been bored now a thousand times at this, eh? I wake up and after farming, I wake up in the sweat. But it's only a dream.
There's boys and their toys.
Yeah. Yeah, someone asked me, what do you do with this, sir? I said, well, to give the youngsters a ride, and I'm the biggest youngster of all.
The Newfoundland Railway has become the stuff for museums, like this railway museum in St. John's.
I'm a fourth-generation railroader, so the railway is really important to me because, in fact, my great-grandfather was actually killed in a really big train accident. So the railway has always been really important to my family. So does anyone here know if maybe they have any relatives who worked on the railway?
School children are now asked to put up their hands if they've ever seen a train. The museum is a popular spot for school groups to tour the place and learn about conductors, porters, and brakemen. And in Cornerbrook on the west coast, another museum. Here, the only surviving steam locomotive sits in its final resting place after chugging across the island for 36 years. This grand old steamer used to be in Southbrook Park, just outside the city. And it was here that she first made CBC television back in 1962, and where we caught up with a young boy on a school outing.
Now, Bill, tell Rich about the 1923 when we had the ice blockade. In 23, we left Portabass to open the road to Cornerbrook. The whole island was blocked with ice and snow.
It's a treat to hear the old folks spin tales about the railway. A bigger treat to climb up the old steam engine and play with the levers and look at the gauges that time had now laid still.
From that point in time, I think the day that I walked aboard the engine up there, even though I didn't know much about it then, well, it seemed like it got into the blood at that time. And I think that was basically all I dreamt about until the day that I finally got hired on as a brakeman back in 1970.
44 years later, we found that same young boy back in the cab of that same steam locomotive, still trying to figure out the equipment.
Not quite sure what these things are here. I know one of these here is for reverse and forward. Some of it is the old braking system. And,
So you didn't know what it was when you were 12 years old, you
still don't know. Even though I ended up being an engineer on the trains back in the 70s, and when I qualified, but that was all diesel locomotive. This here is all still foreign to me.
Rich Cashin spent 18 years as a railroader, becoming an engineer in the footsteps of his father and his grandfather. Among the three generations of railroaders, they have about 120 years of service.
There's always this little ache in your heart somewhere that you always want to be back on the railway, and even today, and I still do a lot of talking about railway and that life as a railroader and what have you. It seems like once it gets in your blood, it never gets out.
There's something about the railway that'll stick in your mind forever. That's in my opinion. I was going to ask you about that. It seems to be a lot of nostalgia attached to the railway.
Very much nostalgia with the railway, that's for sure.
His last train ride was special, but Mont Lingard vividly remembers the next day. A work train rolled by to pick up supplies.
And the boys blew away to me when they went by. I was standing on the rail there waiting as the tears come. I couldn't even take a good picture. I had the camera and I said, I'm not going to get a good picture. Yeah, it was all over now. This is it. I'm not going to see any more trains.
A co-production of Lucatoon Productions and NTV Newfoundland. Land and Sea is provided by the Derek and Mary Henrahan Foundation and by Merck.
Merck, pharmaceutical research, dedicated to preventing disease and improving health. Merck, committed to bringing out the best in medicine.
And by the Canadian Broadcast Corporation.
Canadian Broadcast Corporation. Many Canadians today strive to make a difference in everyday life. The Canadian Broadcast Corporation.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. Be sure to check out more Land and Sea episodes coming soon.